Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
We don't use third-party data, and anyone with a smartphone can be evaluated for credit. We're not limited by the typical data sets, which are, do you have a bank account? Do you have employment data that you can pass us? Do you have a bureau record? None of those things, which were typically exclusionary for a large part of the population in the US, and certainly a large part of the population, the greatest part of the population in Latin America, apply anymore.
That was David Rocha, the CEO and co-founder of Prosperas. And this is episode 189 of the Leaders in Payments podcast. And I'm your host, Greg Myers. This is our second episode in Financial Inclusion Month. Every year, we dedicate 1 month to financial inclusion. My goal is to highlight and bring awareness to what the payments and/or fintech industry does today to help with this global challenge, as well as discuss what more we can do. Prosperas, known as the Financial Inclusion Company, enables lenders to instantly qualify anyone on earth for credit using only the anonymized, non-biased, and consumer-consented data from their smartphones. There are over 4 billion underbanked or unbanked people in the world, including 90 million in the United States, and 70% of them have a mobile phone. Prosperas isn't changing the way people get credit. They are changing the fundamentals behind it. They have built a two-sided marketplace. One side includes the people or micro businesses looking for credit, and the other side, of course, are the lenders. Anyone with a smartphone can be evaluated for credit. David and I go on to talk about their involvement in the Mastercard Start Path program and the Santander X Global Accelerator program, and also their involvement with a super app launching in Latin America. I think the conversation can best be summed up by this quote directly from David. Someone gave us a chance, and that's really what we're trying to do for this broader community, is give them a chance. And we know that if we do, they'll take it, they'll maximize it, and we'll all be better for it. To learn more about Prosperas, please visit www.prosperas.com or visit them on LinkedIn. Before we dive into the episode, I want to give a special thanks to The Clearinghouse for sponsoring Financial Inclusion Month. You can learn more about The Clearinghouse by visiting www.theclearinghouse.org. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, David. Welcome to this special series of the Leaders in Payments podcast focused on financial inclusion. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Greg. It's a pleasure to be on.
Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
Well, I was born in Mexico, moved to Texas when I was 3 years old, grew up here, moved away a couple times for school and for work, but always came back to San Antonio, my hometown. And a little bit about myself. I've been in technology for the better part of this century. Started in IoT when it was just sensors. Now they've changed the name. Then moved into SaaS, selling intelligent transportation systems, selling control systems for C4s and C5s, which are the way that cities control security within their boundaries. And then I moved into cloud, working for one of the biggest cloud companies at the time, which was Rackspace. I think they were third or fourth at the time, globally behind perhaps Salesforce and AWS. And I helped open Latin America for them, started the office in Mexico City. Then after that, I joined a mobile security startup. Then after that, an infrastructure cybersecurity startup in New York. Then an AI and machine learning startup focused in the industrial space, so keeping machines running in Austin. I joined there right after the Series A. Plan was to expand internationally, so they hired people in Asia and Middle East. And I ran the Latin America arm of that company and then exited right before their Series D. And I think now they've officially hit unicorn status. My passion's always been trying to use technology to improve the human condition. So when I was in intelligent transportation systems, it was improving mobility and quality of life. When I was in cloud, it was how to deliver services at scale in a way that was less expensive. So driving innovation in countries and in different parts of the US as well initially. And then in my time in cybersecurity, it was how do you protect critical infrastructure from attack? In AI and machine learning at the company that I mentioned, Spark Cognition, it was how do you keep power stations running so that you don't have brownouts and blackouts, and also at the same time protect them from cyber attack. And now at Prosperas, it's how do you deliver credit in a frictionless way, in a fair way for people who've never had access before. There are 4 billion people on earth that have never had easy access to credit or never had credit at all.
Go ahead and give us the high-level overview of what Prosperas does, and then we'll obviously dive a little deeper into exactly what you're doing.
Prosperas was founded for 2 purposes. The first, coming off the back of the Equifax breach in 2017, was to give every individual control of their private information, starting with their financial information. So we built a platform that allowed that. So it gave every person the power to grant and revoke access related to alternative data that lenders could use to approve them or at least evaluate them for credit. And then on top of that, we added a decisioning platform that allowed lenders to use metadata, anonymized, unbiased metadata. So it doesn't care whether you're a man or a woman or how old you are, where you live, or how much you make, or anything else really about you, in order to evaluate you for credit, whether you're going to be responsible or irresponsible for credit, which is a fantastic on-ramp for the new to credit people because many of them don't have bank accounts. So they don't have transactional history, which most alternative scores depend on. They don't have credit histories, certainly. So repayment history on different credit products, which normally serves as a barrier or a high friction point for getting into the credit market. And we've been able to eliminate that barrier and allow people an easy on-ramp to the credit market. And the real purpose behind that is financial inclusion. Again, going back to it, there are 4 billion people on earth that haven't had access to credit traditionally. And credit is critical. It's the catalyst for growth, both at an individual level, at a business level, for communities, for cities, for states, for countries, and for regions. The reason that the United States has been so prosperous over its history was because individuals and businesses had access to credit to grow their business, to buy a car, to start a business, to fund their education, and to afford a home, be able to buy a home because they don't have the cash, but they can certainly pay for it over many years. That type of economic mobility, that type of economic access, financial access, has been limited to non-existent for most of the developing world. And also, to a large extent, here in the US, there are 90 million people in the US that are thin file or no file because of that lack of data, have limited access to credit or have access to very expensive credit that put them in a cycle that they can't escape of high interest or punitive interest that they can't pay back.
So was there a point in time where a lot of founders have these aha moments and it was like, oh, there's definitely a need here for a solution? I mean, did you sort of have that, or what made you start the company? Why did you start it? What did you see that said, oh, this is a great opportunity?
I think I've always been a big advocate of privacy and of giving everyone a chance, an opportunity. I think that after the Equifax breach, and we'd seen breaches before and certainly see the issues right now around Facebook and some of the other big tech companies, they don't treat our information the way that we would treat it. And so I think that catalyzed an idea that I had with my co-founders. And really, that's what we came together. We came together because we shared a common belief that the information economy, where individuals' private information was traded upon, where they derived no real value from it, either monetary compensation or any other value from it, it had to change. We had to get to a post-surveillance mindset in tech. And so that was, I would say, the initial reason for founding the company. But as we started launching POCs around the world, we saw that access to credit was a problem we could solve also. And the reason that most people don't have access to credit is because there's the lack of data for lenders to evaluate them. Of course, lenders would love to find more customers who are qualified for credit, depending on the credit product, to serve. They just didn't have a way to access them. And we found the technology platform that we provided gave them that way to evaluate individuals and gave individuals and small businesses the opportunity that they've never had before, which is to get credit.
Okay. When you started the company, what was the initial use case? Who were you selling to and what was the value you were selling them?
Oh gosh, we were off. I think a timing perspective, really. We were focused on the US market. We saw what seems like a small percentage in terms of population, but a very large in terms of the number of people that don't have access to credit. Again, close to 90 million, thin file or no file. Access to credit is either under unfair terms or limited at best. These are mainly marginalized populations, people of color, immigrants, women in this country, indigenous people. And we thought that would be a problem that lenders wanted to solve, but we didn't find the message resonating enough here. So we started looking overseas, where we found a hearty appetite for solutions like these. In the countries where we operate outside the US, rejection rates, so declines for credit applications, run anywhere between 65 to 95% of applications. That's a lot of work that these companies have to do to attract new customers interested in their products, get them to apply, and then it becomes wasted money because their conversion rates are so low because of the limitations of what they had to work with initially, these data limitations. So that's a problem that we have been able to resolve for our lending partners. And really, it's because the problem was so present in their countries, much more so than here in the US.
What countries are you in right now?
We have subsidiaries in Mexico, Colombia, in Peru, Chile, and in Brazil. And then we have commercial operations throughout Central America and the southern part of Latin America, as well as in the Near East and Africa.
And what would you say makes your solution unique or different than other things out on the marketplace today?
I think that there's a couple things that make it unique. One is the control for, well, I would say the better way of saying it is we use only first-party data. So the data that we enable lenders to access is all with consumer consent, and that's all the data we use. We don't pull third-party data and try to pull it together and run some machine learning around it and then send it to lenders. We're not a bureau. And this is part of that early framework that we put together where the consumer has full control of who has access to their data, how it's being used, and can revoke that access. I would say that's part one of what makes us different. And it starts with a mindset. It's not our information, it's the consumer's information, and who they choose to share it with and how they choose to use that data is up to them, not to us. And then second, I'd say what makes us different is we don't use demographic data. So we don't, in our platform, incorporate the typical data for at least the credit assessment part that you would see in traditional models. So if you look at the data set that we have incorporated into the models, it's not easy to discern, are they a man, are they a woman, where do they live, how much do they make, the typical things that really only serve to bias models against a population. So you've seen this here in the US when the first alternative models based on bank transactions or social media data were used, where they unfairly scored women, entrepreneurs, and minorities. They had what looked like a good profile for credit. They were a good risk, but alternative data models only serve to exacerbate the problem and continue to exclude them from the credit market. So we wanted to avoid that.
And you're not creating any type of scoring at all, right?
We do. What we deliver is a probability of non-payment score that's based on essentially a psychometric score of that individual. So will they be a responsible borrower or an irresponsible borrower? That's what we added to the platform above the consent and data management part of it.
You provide sort of and I don't know, marketplace is the right word, but the ability for lenders to see these consumers. And I guess I'm trying to think of a good analogy of what exists today where a consumer wants a loan and then the banks can see the opportunity or the lenders can see the opportunity. So you're providing sort of leads.
We're not really changing the way that people get access to credit. We're changing the fundamentals behind it. And so we're very similar to Credit Karma, but we've built a marketplace in Latin America with the largest telco in the region. And we're connecting their close to 300 million consumers. These are users that are looking for individual credit. They're looking for credit for small business. And we allow them to go into their phone, enter the super app that the telco's launched, request a credit, then be provided with options for who can offer them that credit based on fit. And then it's a one-to-one connection between the lender they select and them. And then they can continue the process and get that credit, many of them for the first time. The difference between what Credit Karma offers and what we offer is we don't use third-party data, and anyone with a smartphone can be evaluated for credit. We're not limited by the typical data sets, which are, do you have a bank account? Do you have employment data that you can pass us? Do you have a bureau record? None of those things, which were typically exclusionary for a large part of the population in the US and certainly a large part of the population, the greatest part of the population in Latin America, apply anymore. On one side of the marketplace, because it's a two-sided marketplace, you have the demand for credit, again, from a large swath of the population that's never had access to credit. And on the other side, you have lenders who sign up to viralize their credit products with the largest consumer population in Latin America.
That makes perfect sense. The next question, I think, might help to validate this whole concept because you were just accepted into the Mastercard Start Path program. So can you touch on that?
Yes, and we're very proud. So we previously been accepted into the Santander X Global Accelerator, and most recently we were accepted into the Mastercard Start Path program. And obviously that's a terrific recognition. They do a lot of due diligence, and we passed it. And we think that both of them are focused on, and this is the reason we really applied, is they're focused on and passionate about financial inclusion. Mastercard has a program called the Road to 1 billion. They want to help 1 billion people who have never had access to credit get access to credit. I think they've made significant traction so far and are a few hundred million in to that goal. And the chairperson of Mastercard has made this his mission. So that's terrific. And similarly at Santander, the chairwoman of Santander has made financial inclusion a global goal and has spent a lot of time in the region that we operate in Latin America, specifically in Mexico, focused on how to give new to credit individuals fair and frictionless access to credit. And so again, it's a spiritual alignment, also a business alignment. Everyone who's a lender wants more customers. They're competing right now against fintechs and challenger banks that are pulling market share away from them, and using our technology and partnership with Prosperas, they can help defend against those new players in the market while at the same time benefiting individuals and the societies that they live in.
You mentioned earlier a program with a large telco. Can you dive into that a little more?
Sure. So the largest telco in Latin America is Claro. They're launching a super app, and we are the get credit button within the super app. The reach of Claro across the region is unmatched. They will be providing this super app to close to 300 million individuals across multiple countries, starting in Mexico, Central America, Peru, and Colombia. And again, these populations in these countries, most of them are unbanked, most of them are underbanked, and we're not going to be able to change their lives for the better. We're not allowing any unregulated lenders in the marketplaces, any predatory lenders as well. So again, we're not going to exacerbate the problem. We want to make, at a personal level, their economic situation better, improving lives, improving, obviously, the economic outlook for the communities and regions in which they live and operate, and setting these countries on a path to economic prosperity and social stability that follows. I won't say we'll transform these societies completely. That's a lot of hubris, but we're going to do what we can.
Can small businesses participate as well, or is it just consumers?
Small businesses as well, so long as they depend on an individual for credit. We have to evaluate an individual. So if they're owned by a single partner, or at least there's a managing partner, then we can evaluate them for credit.
Okay. Because I know within a lot of other countries, I guess I would say outside the US, when it comes to financial inclusion, there's micro lending and things like that to help. A lot of times female entrepreneurs get started. They need that startup capital. So I was just curious if that's a part of this.
Yes, and obviously our focus is on entrepreneurs, micro businesses more than small businesses. And we're specifically about to start a partnership with another lender that's focused on indigenous populations, rural populations, and women entrepreneurs in Mexico. And we hope to find similar partners across the rest of the region.
When does the super app launch, or has it already launched?
So it launches this week, friends and family launch, then it starts to roll out across Mexico. And then shortly thereafter, we'll start looking at the other countries as well. The goal is by the end of Q1 to beginning of Q2 to be in all of the devices that I mentioned, this close to 300 million devices.
That's got to be exciting to see your button is the one there in the super app.
I think so. I think it's been a lot of hard work. It's certainly exciting for the company and for the founders. But I think more than anything, we're excited about the impact we can have. The plan was always to viralize our technology, put it in as many hands to make the impact as widespread as possible. I hope will be a positive impact in these individual lives and for the societies, again, in which they live. These countries that have trailed behind the development curve of places like the US, UK, and Europe.
And you're also working with the government of Mexico, is that correct?
Yeah, we're working with the government of Mexico. Obviously, they've got to focus on financial inclusion, especially in this administration. And we've got a few interesting partnerships that should be starting up soon.
In a lot of ways, you're leapfrogging what's out there today in regards to providing credit to the underbanked and the unbanked. But what do you see as next? I mean, what's happening in this space in the next couple of years?
I think what we'd like to get to is where credit becomes borderless. There are a couple other companies working on this problem as well. I would say we're one of the few working on the unbanked or underbanked. Most of the other companies that are working on this problem are bringing people who are already within the credit market, but are moving from one country to another. They're immigrants, which is a valuable goal and a worthy goal. But there are far more unbanked and underbanked people. And we think that the problem there is a pressing one and one that we can solve. And so what I mean by that is what the end goal that we have for the company is that we will be able to connect individuals anywhere with lenders everywhere. So a woman in Cameroon who's an entrepreneur and starting a small business can request credit and can receive offers from lenders across the world. So she's no longer limited by the credit access in her country. She now gets to serve up her requests to the global marketplace. And similarly, maybe a community bank in Oklahoma that has been traditionally limited to customers who are within driving distance of their branches can now find customers around the world and connect with individuals in Colombia or in Brazil or in the Middle East searching for credit.
The borderless concept is fascinating. We've covered a lot of ground so far on this topic and the fascinating things that you guys are doing. Is there anything else you'd like to add or discuss or leave with the audience today?
Yeah, I think, again, I talked about this being a mission-driven company at the beginning. And part of that is that we don't want to be part of this continuously growing gap between the very wealthy and the very poor. So we've instituted policies within our company to make sure that we're not contributing to that problem. So one of those is that the highest paid executive in the company will make no more in salary than 5 times the lowest paid salaried employee. So while it would be great to make tens of millions of dollars in salary as the CEO of Prosperas, we know that as a whole, that's not a great thing for society. It doesn't mean that we're against wealth, but we think that as a CEO, at least, my contribution is not, you see executive pay now several hundred times what the compensation is of the lowest paid employees. And I don't think my value will ever be 100 times greater than the contribution of our lowest paid employee. And I certainly don't think it'll be 50 times. You've seen very large companies transition away from their founders and very strong personalities and visionaries, companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, and the companies continue. They find people to replace them. And ultimately, all of us in the C levels and certainly the CEO level of companies are replaceable. Really, the engine of our institutions and our enterprises are the people that work day in and day out to deliver on our missions.
Great. I'm glad you shared that. I think having that mission aligned with your corporate goals and what you guys are trying to accomplish there is very inspiring. And that's the whole purpose of this month, is to give visibility into what payments and fintech companies are doing. When I saw your website on the front page, you're a financial inclusion company. And I'm like, well, how can I not have them on the show?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the invitation. I like that you're bringing to the surface some of the initiatives and companies and people and organizations that are working to solve this problem, because it is a problem where you have a lack of opportunity, you have a lack of social stability, economic stability. I grew up in a bicultural, coming to the US where I lived and where I went to school, and then going back to Mexico. I saw this big difference in terms of social mobility, economic mobility, and also the underpinnings of that, which were, I would say, a system that didn't benefit all. And I think that the more that we can give opportunity, doesn't mean a handout, but give people a leg up. There's this saying that people like to overuse, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. The origin of that saying was a joke, because nobody can pull themselves up from their bootstraps on their own. You'd be floating. It's a magic trick,
Right.
And it's not possible. All of us get to where we are because of the community around us. Someone gave us a leg up. Someone reached down and pulled us up. Someone gave us a chance. And that's really what we're trying to do for this broader community is give them a chance. And we know that if we do, they'll take it, they'll maximize it, and we'll all be the better for it.
Yeah, and I think what else interests me about this whole topic and what you guys are doing is really you're using technology and data, what I'll call the right way, right? There's so many ways that you can use data and technology to do things to help solve problems, but it doesn't mean it's the right solution and it doesn't mean it's fair and equitable for everyone. And I think the way you guys are protecting privacy and you're using technology in a certain way, I think that's also very interesting and compelling.
No, I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of companies out there that are focused on using technology to solve big problems, and they're focused on the mission more than profit. Profit comes. The best part about starting a company that's mission driven is if you focus on the mission, the revenue and the profit will come because you're solving a problem, and that problem has value. We derive some of the value for it, but also our consumers and our partners, our customers will derive the greater part of that value.
I totally agree. What's the best way for people to learn more about what you guys are doing?
I would say 2 ways. Reach out to us directly on LinkedIn. We're always happy to talk. We're all open networkers. There's plenty of us now in the company. And if that means jump on a phone call or get on a Zoom or go grab a coffee, we're all open networkers and happy to have conversations. And then you can also look on our website, look on our social media profiles if you want to find out more information there.
And we'll definitely link to those in the show notes. So, David, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate all your insight. I really love what you guys are doing. This is a very important topic. And again, thank you so much for your time today.
I really appreciate it, Greg. I love what you're doing here with the podcast, especially this month. Again, it's the reason why we exist. Financial inclusion, we think, is one of the main goals that as a society and globally as a community we should be solving. We really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to all you listeners out there. I appreciate your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.